Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series. Today, I am so excited to have Sherwin, Director of the recently launched Amazon Industrial Innovation Fund. Sherwin, welcome. Please, do you mind sharing maybe 5-10 minutes your journey into corporate venturing and, of course, leading to Amazon?
Yeah, first, Nicolas, thank you so much for the opportunity. We've known each other for a while. I'm just so excited to talk about this new opportunity and what we're doing over at Amazon Industrial Innovation Fund. But a background about how I got here. For those who don't know me, I've been an investor since the early 2000s. I started off on the buy side doing small cap growth equities. I've been in corporate venture since 2010. I was very fortunate to help launch General Motors' corporate venturing activity. And it was really interesting thinking back on that period of time. Today we call it auto tech or mobility tech. There was no such thing at the time that we started this. And so that was exciting. I ended up there, quite interestingly. On the buy side, I worked for Morgan Stanley. I was a buy side analyst, and I covered transportation, including autos. And there was a guy, Steve Gursky, who was well known as a sell side analyst covering autos. Steve got on the board for General Motors, representing the union. And a few years later, unfortunately, they go through bankruptcy. Well, coming out of bankruptcy, Steve joined the leadership team on a full-time basis. He was the vice chair of corporate development and strategy. So this was his idea to create GM Ventures. And so he reached out to me because we both knew the auto industry, and we knew some of the challenges overcoming long entrenched, types of development processes, and we wanted to do something new. So I was certainly happy to take on that challenge, right? So I spent 8 years at GM Ventures. We got a lot done. I'm very proud of that team. We did about 40 deals. We led half of those. So that was really unique during the early 2010, 2011, 2012 to find a corporate that would lead a deal. That's far more prevalent today, but during that time, less than 20%. So we also had 12 exits. But the big win was we had two really cool technologies that are in GM vehicles today. The most popular, well-known one is the Cadillac Super Cruise, right? So that was a really interesting story. So that's how I ended up in venture. I left in 2018, and I spent 2 years trying to raise my own venture fund, focused on mobility. That ultimately didn't work, but I'm really glad I gave it a shot. And what I learned through that process is frankly why I love being a corporate venture, right? And being associated with that idea of helping watch a startup go through the development process and change the world, right? That's just an awesome feeling. So a few months ago, November of last year, Amazon reached out to me, the global robotics team. Global robotics supports our package business and all of the centers that we use for the package business. And so they had this idea. They really wanted to get involved with startups really early. We have a lot of scale at Amazon, and we saw a unique opportunity to develop an entity, a corporate venturing group that can mentor these startups. Because when you go really early, those guys need a lot of help, as you know. And so I was aligned with that vision. They're based out of Boston, our robotics group. They're in Boston and Seattle. And so it was an exciting opportunity. And it's so different being in this business as opposed to manufacturing. So that's how I ended up in venture. I haven't looked back. I absolutely love supporting startups. I love working with fellow corporates and financial investors to help these technologies get to market.
Thank you, Sherwin. So let me go back to the very beginning of your background, because I think that's interesting. And I think you're probably the first one of the 50 plus interviews who come from the buy side, especially on the equity. And my guess is that it comes with a lot of discipline on value and timing. Can you share a little bit what it is that you're still using today that you learned when you were on the buy side at Morgan Stanley?
Yeah, so what's fascinating about the buy side, for those who may not be that familiar, we were the ones who manufactured the product, the small cap growth product. So we may have a portfolio of 35 to 40 companies. but you literally talk and meet hundreds of management teams.
Mm.
You see some really good ones, you see some really bad ones, right? But what you really still care about is the size of a market opportunity and how is this company differentiating itself to capitalize on that opportunity. So that still applies. Not only on the buy side, but I spent some years as an adjunct lecturer teaching finance. So I'll tell you the biggest thing that I don't use is valuation techniques, DCF.
Yeah.
The thing that surprised me most about venture capital was how useless that technique is for a Series C, Series A, Series B company, right? And so when you go down that path as a corporate venture, you have to understand when you put out those types of metrics, your corporation expects to hold you to those metrics. And so I quickly pivoted to comparables, paying a lot of attention to other financings that have taken place. What were those valuations done? I learned the importance of networks, understanding other venture capitalists that participate in this area. Talk to them about some of their deals. So that was the part that was really interesting. So some of the disciplines around Porter's 5 forces of competition, things like that, those things still apply. Where you have to be a bit more careful is around evaluation parameters. You almost have to buy into a venture story or don't. That's the important thing that I think about.
When you mention buy-in, you mean building your own conviction, right?
That's
it's not
right.
just about, I agree with what the entrepreneur is saying. You need to actually buy into what they're saying. It becomes your conviction.
Yeah, that is really key. You know, we always say that we're betting on the jockey, not the horse, right? So the jockey is that CEO, and they should be able to tell you a story, paint you a picture. Why do they value this dream? And do you share that value? That's really an important part of the process. I've seen some interesting companies that are working on things that are interesting, but I don't have the conviction around that. And because you need to champion this company, and these investment periods are really long, like a marriage, you really got to be aligned from the beginning, or you're not doing them a service. And so I'm asking myself all the time, Nicolas, how do I add value to this story? You know, money is not a differentiator. One could argue in the current environment, maybe a bit so. But frankly, there's a lot of money in venture capital. And I encourage the founders to be selective about who they let into their deals, right? So you're absolutely right. That's how you value the dream. It has to be the same value for you. You have to be equally passionate about what this thing could be. That's when you should put your money into the company.
I like the way you talk about the story and joining the story. So at TDK Ventures, we have 4 core values. One is entrepreneurs first. And the way we describe it is entrepreneurs are our customers, the heroes of our story. And so here it's about believing in the story, wanting to join the story, adding value. And we'll go into how do you plan to add value. And we talked about it before, so I know you have so many good golden nuggets to share. But I still want to go into your background. You joined GM in 2010. You built a portfolio of 40 companies, and you led half of this. And that's very surprising because at the time, especially CVCs would have the bad rep of not being financially disciplined and not knowing what they are doing. And to be able to lead and to price around, this is very special. So tell me how you managed to do it.
Yeah, you know, there's a saying that necessity is the mother of invention. So in the early days when I joined GM, I went on a roadshow. I started talking to other corporate VCs. I started talking to financial VCs. And the rude awakening in that process was there were no financial VCs eager to have yet another corporate to do a deal with. I had the added complexity that I'm in a long cycle business. The vehicle development program is typically 7 years long from conception to product. And it's hardware. The vehicle is hardware. So the VCs weren't particularly interested at all. And so I quickly decided, okay, we're going to lead our own deals. And so this becomes part of your brand. When you have the CVC, if you're going to be successful, you have to create a brand. I call it a sub-brand of your company. So we created these term sheets. We had our logo on it. And we started offering these companies valuations on the deals. I felt comfortable going down the valuation path because of my prior experience.
Yeah, that
I
helps.
also worked as a valuation consultant in my life, right? So I was not uncomfortable doing that. And so because we really were one of the few corporates doing it, the term sheets began to circulate around the venture community. And some of the financial VCs said, "Son, it's actually pretty clever. I would do this type of term sheet." And so we began to get into deals that had other financial VCs, and we would just lead it. We set discipline by walking away around valuation or around terms that were inherently unfair. So we really began to build that practice. We were really clear that GM was not going to acquire any of these companies. So we're not your exit strategy. So now I can focus on helping you build value, right? We could be a great customer, right? And we overcame objections around what would happen if you let a strategic into your deal. No one would ever want to buy it. Yet we had 12 exits out of 40.
Yeah.
Those are pretty good odds, right? And so I do realize that a strategic has a unique value proposition. If you think about your portfolio as a normal distribution curve, where you should have an advantage as a strategic, you shouldn't have as many failures. Because if you truly have superior expertise from your subject matter experts, you should be able to vet out those that are more likely to fail at a faster rate than what your financial peers can do. And we found that to be the case at GM Ventures, right? So.
In a way, it's very interesting. I think it's an unfair advantage compared to financial VCs. You have this world-class expertise from your mothership you can leverage. Right. And indeed, you should have less zeros and potentially many more heroes. But you also talk not just about unfair advantage, but unfair terms. And here I feel like there is something to learn. Can you share a bit of your experience about the bad practices you saw and what you did to make sure that you were not anchored by them, but actually challenge them?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. All of our friends that are in corporates that are investing somehow, whether they have a well-developed CVC or some other avenue, they can relate to this. The challenge is your corporation always feels that it's adding far more value to the startup than it actually is, okay? Every company that I've worked for, and Amazon is my fourth, right? I always hear it, we're bringing all this value. But then when you challenge them to show you the results, show me the results of where this value came from, that's where it falls apart. Mm-hmm. But what happens is they come into, too many corporations start from a very selfish position. They're looking for what can they get out of this company instead of what can we bring to this company. And what is that venture capital is a risk-sharing business. This is why when existing investors don't participate, they normally get punished. Mm. So what I would see was that in the terms, the right of first notice, the right of first offer, right? They basically want to lock up the option to buy the company.
Yep.
What they don't spend enough time doing is thinking through the consequences on future financings. So I think what I've been able to do in most cases very well is educate the leadership team. They have preconceptions about how this business works, which is often very different from how it actually works. So I like to take the time up front and invest in educating my leadership team around some of the perceptions they have and what happens in practice. And I keep them focused on longer term value. So I quickly adopted the basic NVCA term sheet.
Very nice.
We stuck closely to those. We did need certain conditions precedent in certain cases, right? But you have to be careful that whatever you put in this term sheet, I'm always thinking about the round after my round.
So it does not escalate into even worse terms anyway.
Exactly. What objections? Because as we know, it's so easy to say no in venture capital because there's just so many companies and not enough, of the VCs. So you quickly assess the deck and then you move on. So I also wanted that to permeate our brand. Because as you know, bad news travels faster than good news. So we wanted people who were exposed to our term sheets or who interacted with our team. We wanted them to be able to say, yeah, I've seen their term sheets. They're actually starting from a place I would start. And that actually facilitates getting a syndicate partner faster than not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does make sense. You also mentioned something, I feel like there's a golden nugget. You talked about sub-brand. Can you double click on that?
Yeah, so if you go back to 2010, it was not lost on me as a person living in Michigan that we had two of the big three go into bankruptcy. The big companies like GM, they're already lightning rod brands. Half the world loves it for whatever reason. Half the world doesn't love it for whatever reason. And so what I recognized was this unique opportunity. Building GM Ventures, I was approaching a industry segment that actually had no legacy experience with the company. Mm-hmm. So they weren't entrenched in their views that it was good or bad. And so because they weren't entrenched, we had the opportunity to set what that perception was. But our name was GM Ventures. So I couldn't escape the General Motors, right? Mm-hmm. That's why I call it a sub-brand. Because people knew if you were talking to GM Ventures, GM is not going to acquire your company. They're not going to overpay for a deal, right? But they are going to be fair, right? And that even led to twice we recapped companies. And one of the best compliments I ever got, I did a recap and they always suck for those who aren't participating. Yep. But someone wrote me a note, one of the existing investors, and he said, listen, this really sucks, but you made it as painless as it could possibly be, given how painful it is. That was a huge compliment.
Oh, let's triple click on this. What did you do to make it that painless? Because that's always painful.
Yeah. What I did was treated everyone fairly, right? So when you have a company that's been around 8 or 9 years and you've raised multiple rounds, the misalignment happens right away. And so what I did was I looked at the cap table. So one thing people will learn about me, I'm a cap table junkie. The cap tables have to be right. And I have everybody on my team can do cap tables. Because what I tell them all the time is when you're doing a deal, everyone gets along. But it won't take long before misalignments happen. Then before that happens, you should know who your friends are. You don't wait till you need friends to figure out who they are.
Yep. And friends are friends when it's tough.
Yeah, exactly. And so in this deal, I made sure that every class got treated the same. So it sucked equally for the A's as it did the B's and the B1s.
Right? That's a golden nugget.
Yeah. And so, again, you also try to create terms to incentivize some of the people on the sideline to want to come in. Yep. And if you can structure the deal in such a way where there's just a little bit of a benefit for those who's doing the recap and not this really big disparity, you can often win over a few folks.
So what do you think about this pay to play? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of pay to plays, but I will use them. I mean, it is a tool that has to be used. Normally, the first time a company needs a bridge, most people participate.
Yeah.
It's when it gets to be prolonged that you have to think about the pay to play.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a situation right now. Investors are tired. They're ready to move on. They want to put the company up for sale. There are certain benefits that I think that Amazon and the fund can bring. So I'm talking through with them a way to structure a deal that doesn't penalize them to pay to play. Then you convert it into a long-term call option, right? So you say, listen, what if we can make this structure is not punitive to you, right? But we all get 18 months or so to see if we can make some magic happen. And I have to be honest, I get a very positive response from that idea. Now we just have to see if we can deliver on that.
Okay, this is very sophisticated and I like the approach. I'll have one more question, actually two more questions from your background, but one is about GM Ventures success. And you mentioned something really nice, which is 12 exits, which is very significant out of 40. But then you said you were even more proud was 2 technologies being deployed in GM. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so every strategic gets this decision matrix very early in their formation. They go through this discussion around whether they're strategic or financial. I really think that's a false premise. And I say that for the following. If you invest in a company and it provides strategic value to your organization, it will by its very nature have financial value. So the two aren't linked. However, because corporate venturing has a long history of being cyclical, and we know of corporates who started a venture, and we know of corporates who ended that venture.
Quite
it
a
is
few.
My strong belief that we are always strategic. And when you work for a company the size of a General Motors or the size of an Amazon, there is no financial return I can get big enough to move the needle. So what I want to focus on instead are those technologies that are somehow enhancing the life of the customer. In the early days of GM Ventures, in the first month, I made a decision to take an investment approach that we all hear about. We've all heard of Morningstar and their 9 blocks. When we first started GM Ventures, we started getting inundated with all of these inbound requests to look at these technologies. Some were in the vehicle, some were in the manufacturing facility. I needed to make a decision. And so I asked myself, where is our value? What do customers expect from General Motors? And I realized that customers expect the value to show up in the car. They don't care about what happens in the manufacturing facility. So at the beginning of my 3rd week, I came back to my team and said, listen, here's our investment thesis. Notice there's an investment thesis.
Yep.
That is, how do we find technologies that reduce incentives and increase residual values? So my simplified premise was the customer has to care about the technology, which means I got to focus it on the car. That also took my team of people and it helped narrow down what they should be looking for, which companies should they engage with, right? And so that's what I really meant by that process of getting into this. How do we make sure we're really focusing on the drivers of value? What I'm seeing today that concerns me, Nicolas, there's too many strategics that are now running around because they believe they should be doing financial returns. Now, I worked on Wall Street, and a famous saying on Wall Street is don't confuse brains for a bull market. So it's not a surprise to me. A lot of these corporate ventures that have been doing this for a number of years now through the SPAC bubble, they all have success and they all think they're great investors, right? Yep. But what happens is the markets turn. And if you're in a manufacturer and things get tight because of a recession, your organization is going to start looking at where do we cut, right? So I know it works for some based upon corporate culture. I just think it's a disaster waiting to happen. And if you live by the sword, you die by the sword.
Please double click on that. I know you have much to say about this, so I think it was really double clicking.
Yeah, look, I have been around for a long time. I remember working on Wall Street in the early 2000s when some of the people who were most known, Barton Biggs, who was a huge strategist, I remember them saying one time, we have a lot of young money managers that have never seen a bear market.
Yep.
And so they all think they're the best, brightest ever, but they've never had to go through the fire, right? Let's take this current market environment. So a lot of the young money managers have raised money in the last 5 years.
Yep.
They now see COVID come along and they see, are we going into a recession or not? Despite the fact that there are literally over $200 billion of dry powder sitting on the sideline, we've shortened investment horizons from 5 years to 3 years. So they have to deploy that money. But what they did, they're stuck like a deer in headlights. So we've seen a pullback in the amount of capital being deployed because some of these people had never seen this thing, don't know what to do, right? And so it's interesting. So we see now some are emerging as opportunists. So there are VCs going around basically offering well below market valuations because it's an opportunity, right? I don't think you want those people in your company. I certainly don't want them in my investment syndicate. Okay. But then you have more experienced people who are steady as she goes. They will move valuations to reasonable places, but they're more focused on how do I help this entrepreneur bring this product to the market, right? And those are the people we all want to be syndicate partners with, because they're going to stick around when things get bad. So when you think about the pay to play, you only want to use that when you are literally the last person willing to write a check. And even then, you can use that structure as the beginning of a negotiation to get other investors into the deal, even for small amounts. And 3 times we've had companies that we had written off for debt, but we kept bridges going and they ended up getting acquired, right? So if you can hang around a water cooler long enough, as John Lochner used to say, you can get to an exit.
But it's for the ones you believe in the story.
Now, that's really important. The other challenge is, because we are corporates, sometimes we want to be adults, sometimes we don't, right? There are times when you just have to recognize you've been on the wrong train. And you guys collectively have to make the decision. I've been in situations where I would communicate. So a bridge comes along because it's not going well. So the very first bridge comes along. I would tell the board, I would say, listen, we don't think that this is going to work for us. We're happy to support this bridge, but this will be our last check. You can't pull the rug out from under a startup, but you can give them a lot of advance notice and a little financial support. So back to the education of your leadership team. I would say to my leadership team, listen, most of these aren't going to work, but don't be surprised if I come to you and ask for your blessing to put more money into this company that I told you is not going to work. I'm doing it because we're positioning for a better exit, which will provide a better outcome for everyone. Or some corporates like to bury their head in the sand. All of a sudden, when things aren't going well, they have nothing to say in the boardroom, right? So they're communicating to you, we're done with this story, And I don't think that's the way to build relationships that last a long time in an industry that is predicated on relationships that last a long time.
I think you just described a beautiful golden nugget. And I like the fact you communicate with the leadership team, you communicate with the entrepreneurs, their board, to make sure the expectation is set. You are no longer a fit, but you're going to help and to structure it the right way.
Yes. And part of that help, as you know, sometimes you can introduce them to other investors that might be better suited, or other strategics, where a strategic transaction might develop, right? But you never stop fighting for the startup, even when you're not going to fund it. But the key is to make sure that you communicate fairly and transparently all the way.
Yeah. And I can see you care about entrepreneurs, but there's also one thing you said, customer has to care. And that, I think, is very important, especially for Amazon, which is customer-centric.
Right.
How do you actually double down now that you're at Amazon on this customer centricity?
Yeah, so the beauty of Amazon is a very interesting company. So I haven't been here that long, but it's almost like a accelerated itself. There are like literally hundreds of little businesses inside of Amazon. And we need things like customer obsession to be our North Star, so that everyone understands, right? Some of the things that you laid out for what TDK Ventures does. So here, I'm always thinking through, how does a technology enhance the employee experience? And how does it enhance the customer experience? It could be ensuring that same-day delivery happens the same day, right? It could be ensuring that our employees are working in the safest environment, that we've taken every step we can to ensure that this employee can be effective at work and go home feeling the same way they did when they came through the door, right? And so this is how we translate those. And I'm asking the technology companies, how does that impact these metrics? Explain to me how this will enhance the employee experience and the customer experience. Mm-hmm. And I'm finding that some of the companies have to make an adjustment. They have to think that one through because they don't necessarily get that question. Now, I think it helps that I'm not an engineer. So I don't dig in the same way. I'm an investor. I'm thinking through what are the impacts? How does the customer experience this technology? Is it easy to use? Is it overly complex? Is it intuitive? Or things like that.
I like what you say about not being an engineer can be an advantage. You don't fall in love with the technology necessarily. You fall in love with the benefits it could bring.
Yes. I got an interesting example there. So when I was at GM, I was in Germany visiting, and I got a chance to get into a vehicle on a track. I get in on the passenger side. And the first thing you do when you get in the car is what? You reach for your seatbelt. I go to reach for the seatbelt, and then I can't feel it. So I look. It is so far back on that A-pillar.
No, okay.
And so I said to the guy driving it, I said, listen, normally when you move a seat forward or backwards, the seatbelt's attached to the seat. And on the driver's side, there was a little rivet that holds the seatbelt. It was missing on the passenger side. I says, what happened to it? And the guy says, oh, well, we were going through cost downs and we were looking for little things that we can take out of the vehicle to save money. And I instantly thought of the customer. And I said, I would never buy this car.
Yep.
I said, so that dollar we saved lost us sales for people who have such a miserable experience, but it was an engineer who thought through this as a math exercise instead of from a customer perspective, right? And so that's why we got to keep customer perspectives in mind all the time.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. I want to touch on team building. So clearly you've done it multiple times across multiple CVCs. How do you think about team building when you start, especially in terms of internal to the mothership, external to the mothership, and the level of skill set you're looking at, especially when you're thinking about maybe the first 5 or 10 of your team?
Yeah, so very interesting experiences. So at General Motors, I actually inherited a team of people that was already there. These were MBA types, had never had any investment experience. They weren't engineers, but they were really passionate about business. So what you have to do then in that case, if you inherit people, you have to give them a real assessment, right? So when I remember doing the very first performance reviews, the team had been newly formed. It had been 4 months from the time I joined, and we run into the performance evaluation cycle. I give everyone meets expectations. And Nicolas, they had a fit, right? We were so used to grade inflation. But each one that I spoke to, I would ask them, well, have you ever done this before? No. I says, well, listen, that's why you have to meet expectations. I says, but more importantly, as a team, we're all starting from the same point. So what I am doing is baselining and level setting everyone so that people can get evaluated fairly based upon results that they have delivered. So I don't wait till performance reviews to get feedback. The best thing you can do for an employee is provide them real-time feedback from the very beginning. Now let's contrast that to some of the other places I worked, where I was literally trying to build a team. But in both cases, the common denominator was I'm looking for people that are super passionate about working with entrepreneurs. We have to ask more questions before we can give them feedback. We have to understand. We have to look for solutions. In a big corporation, we all know we're going to get paid at whatever the regular pay cycle is. You don't know that in a startup. I need you to be empathetic to that, right? So when I thought about building the team here at Amazon, a couple of things. Amazon values speed. Amazon values think big. So I wanted to come in and make impact as quickly as possible. but I didn't want to do so by sacrificing the customer obsession experience of their startups. So keeping that in mind, what made sense was to reach into my network and think through who have I worked with before that I believe provided a phenomenal experience, whose approaches align with that of startups.
Mm.
You relate to that experience. So I was fortunate enough to be able to identify 2 people that joined me here literally in the last month and a half that fit that. Now internally, there was a bit more vetting. My preferred approach is to have multiple conversations, get to know someone over multiple discussions, so that I can understand what their value drivers are.
Yeah.
How do they think about situations? Are they more focused on making sure their company is benefited? Are they more, neutral or focused on their startup? I prefer the latter, right? It doesn't mean that you have to compromise your company in order to be very startup focused. The other thing I will say is, look, there are times where we, just like when we invest in startups and we kind of realize it's not going to make it, there are times at GM Ventures, I hired people who ultimately weren't cut out for it. I helped those people find other roles in GM, if that's what they desire, where they would be a better fit. But along the way, we discussed where the expectation was. And in some cases, people think, I describe the startup business this way. It's like taking your significant other to a really nice restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
The lights are low, the candles are on the table, the music is soft. But if you go in the kitchen, it is utter chaos. That is startups. Okay. So I want to work with people who don't mind sometimes the ambiguity and that the fire, there's a fire burning nature of working with a startup. And I look for that in the people. The bigger challenge I find, Nicolas, and I'd be curious to hear from you, technical people. It can be tough to find really technical people who have enough extrovertedness to actually develop strong communication with the startup. Have you run into that?
Yes, but I think the way I look at it is it's all about curiosity and love for the technology and wanting to know. And if that is strong enough, they will go and ask a question. They will want to understand. They will spend a lot of time. So you could have someone very, very strong technically. And if they don't have the curiosity, you fall into what you're describing. If they are very curious, which is the reason they started in the first place, and there is a passion behind,
yes,
they will go out of even being the most introvert and asking all the right questions and understanding the entrepreneurs and their point of view. So I'm trying to find questions that touch about curiosity. And so most of the time I try to ask questions that are outside the resume. What do you know that's not described in your resume? What have you not touched, but you know a lot about? That kind of things.
Yeah. Or passions and interests outside of the resume.
Exactly.
Right? There are people here who are really into, in some cases, mountain climbing, for example, or certain TV shows. And it's just really fascinating when they kind of stumble across that common interest. They light up in their face and they start talking about these things.
Exactly.
I'm really fortunate that at Amazon, learning and be curious is one of the leadership principles. And so here I am today. I'm in Westboro, Massachusetts, at one of our facilities. And I work with some of the smartest people ever. And they tend to all have this learn and be curious. And I hear a lot of, and how about this? Or how about this? So they're always looking for ways to make something work.
Yep.
And that's really interesting versus some cultures that are more not invented here, or we have to build it ourselves. In fact, the idea of this fund came from the idea that we believe that there are technologies being worked on outside of our four walls that can enhance our employee experience, that can enhance our customer experience, right?
Yep.
And so
you could argue creating this fund is as strong a signal as possible to everyone in Amazon and outside Amazon. That's what you want to do.
But where we have to hone in on is this sub-brand building. Okay.
Go back
Amazon is
to
a
the top
lightning rod
brand.
company, right? And I didn't know as much about it other than they were phenomenal at getting me my packages in 2 days. But now that I'm here and seeing the depth of your organization, um, we need to bring that same customer obsession. And I am, kind of preaching the virtues. A startup is not a supplier. Too many corporations want to treat them like a supplier and jump to volumes or other things that they're not ready for yet. So part of my education process is continually reminding this is a startup. It's not a supplier yet. It's an aspiring supplier, right? So we have to help them along the way. They're going to have some glitches, and we can't view that as all startups just aren't ready. You have to help them get ready. And that's what a good CVC does. We're that champion, that liaison, and we keep the dialogue and expectations between the startup and our company in check so that nobody gets too misaligned.
Indeed. And it's nearly like setting the right APIs between the two. But I feel like it goes beyond education. It probably also means you need to champion change in processes so that the organization learns to adapt to the startups who are very early stage. How do you plan to do that?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. I will say every place I've worked, that's a challenge, right? Because when you're a big company, you have developed these processes that work well for your existing business as it is. So what I start to do is you build internal relationships. I get to know some of the people in those key areas that matter, whether it's corp development, whether it's finance, it's accounting, it's legal. And we begin to have these one-off conversations. And I share a vision. We're thinking big over here. This is what we think is possible, right? Help me understand how it works today, but learn and be curious. Why does it work that way today? And then you often begin to find out that they're not accustomed to working. This is new for them. I'll give you a good example. At GM, so GM has thousands of suppliers. And in the auto industry, there are standard terms and conditions. Every supplier has to sign up for it. Well, when we first started with startups, they said, here's our standard terms and conditions, and we're not going to change them. And so I really advocated, and GM embraced creating a team inside of purchasing that was focused only on startups.
That's a big change.
That is a big change. So what I'm working on here, Amazon is very big on docs, the documents. So we don't do PowerPoints. We write very thoughtful pieces so that people can understand the issue deeply. So I'm working on a document now that really kind of describes a different process from what we've been doing at Amazon that might yield better results. And what that means by better results, we may be better at getting more high profile companies that are changing the world to partner with us. We may get a higher success rate on those companies we work with that we ultimately end up. And by the way, I'll take this opportunity to mention, what does success look like for us?
Yeah, please.
I'm promoting what I call 2020 by 27. So in the next 5 years, by 2027, 20% of our portfolio companies should be receiving revenue from Amazon through the sale of products and services to Amazon. 20% of our companies should have experienced an exit. Now, because I believe we're strategic and not financial, that latter one is not about financial returns. It's about my team's ability to identify the right entrepreneurs solving the right problems.
Exactly.
So that's how we think about it, this new team of mine.
In a way, you're trying to combine the discipline of picking the winners and the ability for you to bring the goodness of the mothership.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is what makes Amazon unique. With the scale of Amazon, think about things. These startups want you to be customers, partners. So we always have some type of pilot or proof of concept. The beauty of the scale of Amazon is we have those everywhere. So we can talk to a startup in Iowa or Wyoming or San Francisco, and we have someplace clearly nearby them where we could potentially organize something, right? And so this is a huge opportunity frankly, unlike any other I've had.
Now, what I think I find very interesting, and maybe I will challenge you here, I nearly feel like this document you're writing, which could change the process in Amazon to engage with breakthrough companies, young startups who really want to change the world, could have more impact and move the needle more for Amazon than nearly anything else you could do.
Well, I think it could as well, right? Especially for a culture that also cultivates a lot of its own technologies. I think what we all want to see when a corporate invests in a startup, we're trying to shift the timeline to the left.
Yep.
How do you accelerate getting a technology to market?
Yep.
And so this is where I do think there are some innovations or iterations to existing processes that could unlock additional value that we may not have been capturing before.
And I really like your thinking about success and how to define it and look at what type of outcomes you're looking at. Now, this is success in 5 years. How do you define your KPIs for yourself, for your team, year on year? And how do you see them maturing as you mature your fund?
Well, that's a really good one. Corporates have struggled with KPIs for a long time.
Yeah.
Here's how I think about that. So our objective here in the short run, year to year, is 25 deals in the first year.
Mm-hmm.
And then we will look at all of the mechanisms or processes we have in place. And did we hit that or not hit that? I just went from a team of 1 on March the 1st to a team of 5 today, right? So we're in the early days, but we haven't changed the metric.
Yep.
So do I recognize we may not hit it in 2022? Yes, I do. But I think it's the right metric. When you have a fund this size, we need to make an impact in the market. And so one of the things you see us doing is making a range of investments. We're targeting Series Seed to Series B. So
Yep.
we're starting really early. But I'm open. As you know, sometimes the lettering of a stage gets a little fuzzy. So what I'm more interested in is what is the specific opportunity? What is the situation of that opportunity? Right? So we're not going to change the metrics. I never want to lower the bar. We have to find ways. Let's understand why we didn't hit it. If we didn't hit it, what parts of the mechanisms should be changed to get the desired results?
Yeah.
And so I have a heuristic, and I would love to hear how you think about this. My experience over the last 12 years is that one of your investment team leads can probably manage 8 to 10 portfolio companies and still be able to source some deal flow. Once you get beyond that ratio, you begin to compromise the ability of that talent to bring in. Have you seen that, or what's the KPI that you use for that measure?
So we don't have KPIs in terms of number of investments or number of portfolio companies per investment directors. But I can relate to the sizing of the team in the way of, if we want to bring real value to our portfolio companies, I think you can do that probably to between 6 and 8. And I'm talking about supporting them outside the board, but also in the board. Yeah. And if you start to do more than that, you probably are compromising somewhere. Yeah. And the problem is that the somewhere is probably going to be in the value to the entrepreneurs. And so I think the sizing of the team needs to grow. And in a way, it scales nearly linearly with a portfolio company size. And if not, then you're compromising somewhere.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I tell you, as I reflect on lessons learned when I was at GM Ventures, the biggest one is this takes a bigger time commitment than companies think when they go down this path. I think many corporations start this process wanting to be fairly passive, but then they quickly find themselves questioning the results. And I kind of say, don't you think they're correlated, right? If you didn't spend a lot of time, why would you expect a lot of value, right?
That is true.
And so I love your idea around the 6 to 8. And I think that there's a lot of room there, because what happens, as you know, by the time you get to year 3, 4, or 5, you begin to get this distribution. There's a steady cadence.
Yeah.
20% of these things we're not going to do this anymore. You'll have another 20% that do really well. And some of these things last a long time. Interesting story. It's 2011. We invested in Relay Rides, now called Turo. In 2022, Turo is a venture-backed company. So it goes to show you these are very long-tailed opportunities.
Yep.
And those that can find ways to keep business momentum can keep getting funded, right? I want to believe all good ideas get funded. And I'm sure entrepreneurs will disagree with that, right? But the marketplace sourced this out. If you got a really good idea, so I'm a big believer in syndicates. And even if I like a company and they're raising $5 million, right? I will say to them, listen, I'm interested. Maybe we'll do 2 or so, but you got to go find some other investors.
Yep.
Right? You never want to be the only one financing the deal. Now I say that, but in the early days of GM Ventures, we actually found ourselves doing that a bit until our term sheets got out there. And some of the best deals we did with other investors that we built the syndicate for, or that invited us into the syndicate, right? So I believe in the power of the syndication. By the way, we've done a deal together too, as you know.
Yes. And hopefully many more in the future.
Absolutely.
Very early on, I was told, be very careful not to be the one holding the long pole, which means that you have to keep going, because if you don't, that's it for the startup. So maybe you can share your experience, because in GM Ventures, especially when you were leading, probably there was times where you felt like you were holding the long pole.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite a bit of time. And I tell you the other thing, when corporations are excited about starting and investing in startups, no one thinks about the failures. They have to be managed too. Mm-hmm. And there's always reputational risk around that. So my process when I think about that is, one, we're never the only one in the deal. So what I rely on is developing a relationship with the other investor around the table that I think is strongly aligned with our view of the company. We believe in the company, even though we're beginning to see it may not happen. And I begin to think about an orderly process of liquidating. This is where, whether one question I always get is around influence. Someone asks me, well, if you only own 10 or 15% of a company, how do you have influence? If you're not a board member, how do you have influence? And I says, influence isn't measured by your ownership or your board position. Influence is measured by the value you can add, and everybody around the table recognizes that value add, right?
Yep. And listening to it. Yep.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And so then what happens is, when you know that you're 6 months out from cash out, that board conversation needs to pivot. And you may need to be the one, especially if you're the one with the long pole in the tent. Mm-hmm. You need to be the one to start advancing that conversation. Hey, for the next board meeting, can you start to talk about what exit opportunities exist? Can you begin to lay out what expenses are discretionary versus non-discretionary? And you'll get this look around the table, because CEOs hate that, right? But you have to be the guy to be prepared to take those steps.
Yeah.
Too often we wait till the company has 60 days of cash. That is absolutely the wrong time to start trying to find a fire extinguisher.
Yep. So I want you to maybe take 3 minutes for the entrepreneurs who are going to listen now, to watch the video later. What's the mission of the fund? What's the investment thesis you're building? And what value do you plan to bring to them?
Thank you for that opportunity to talk about that. So the Amazon Industrial Innovation Fund is really looking to turbocharge the industrial automation space. So clearly we're looking at our package business. But what we're hoping to do is to support strong entrepreneurs that are working on really hard problems. Some of those problems today, maybe they're targeting supply chain logistics right away, but in some cases they're not. We're still interested in those stories. What I'm looking for, let's take identification. We care a lot about, can we identify the different barcodes on the package, right? And we're looking to reduce the number of handheld scans. So if you're working on a identification technology, but you're targeting the cellular industry for mobile phones, I want to talk to you, right? And what you can expect from us is, Nicolas, we're putting one of the best teams on the field. This team has 20 years of venture experience collectively. We have 20 years of buy-side experience. We're investors that are passionate about entrepreneurs. What we think we can offer you is the opportunity for the mentoring, not only from us, but from some of our technical experts. We can help you think through how to scale your technology. We can help you think through addressing some of the technological challenges that you guys may experience. We want to hear from you early. Maybe you've just spun out of a university and you're looking to do your first seed round. Maybe you're a Series B company and you're looking for growth, right? Let's have that conversation. And what we're going to bring to you is not just the power of our fund and our team, but the power of Amazon and the power of our networks, right? And so this is what we're looking for these entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Sherwin. And I can say for the entrepreneurs who are listening, we have co-invested with Sherwin in the past, and it means every single word. And that leads me to something, Sherwin, because you talk about this 20 years experience. You haven't quite answered my question earlier about your recruitment between internal and external. So maybe let me put it with a positive spin.
Okay.
When is it valuable to recruit internal team members, and when is it valuable to recruit external team members?
Yeah, so thank you for rephrasing that. So here's what I will tell you. It's beneficial to recruit experienced startup people. They can be partnerships people. They can be former investors, whether you're a partner or not. My preference is to typically recruit outside people. Part of the reason for that is you really want to inject new thinking. And one of the things you bring in, if you're not careful about selecting internal people, you bring some of the bad habits of your organizations that you're trying to shed. For example, if someone says to me, hey, we've seen this company before. This happened to me. I had a guy that we brought in from engineering. They had seen this startup 3 years before. And his first reaction when I sent him this name was, oh, we've seen this before. They don't have anything. I said, that was 3 years ago, right? And so that's when you kind of get a sense, okay, maybe I got the wrong guy, right? That can happen. But now what I will say, in an organization the size of Amazon that attracts people from many industries, I had quite a few people who actually had venture experience that have reached out to me. And that is the type of thing that I've gotten those guys on a short list. And so once we have instituted this infrastructure, we begin to scale, I would look at them. But I also like external people that are working in venture because they have the most real-time view of what's happening in the marketplace, right? And they have the most up-to-date networks. Once you've been in a corporation for 5 years, 7 years, you kind of lose some of those. So I do have a clear bias. I will acknowledge that. My team today, 2 of the folks were hired from the outside, as I said, and another folks were inside. So it's a team of 5, and 3 of us are from the outside and 2 of us from the inside. So maybe that 40-60 internal to external is a good measurement.
Okay, I think I agree with this kind of nice ratio and leveraging the value of each. And I think part of it is also the filters you need to be careful about.
Yes, I agree. Well, and not being an engineer, look, I've always operated off of an investment thesis, right? And I would meet all types of companies. I don't need to know the 4-stroke cycle theory of an internal combustion engine to know if I'm hearing an interesting story attacking a segment of the market that has considerable size, right? And if that doesn't come across in the pitch, you need to probe for that. And you just say, well, come back once you understand that, right? So.
Very nice. So in the last minute together, can you describe what you are excited to invest in the next 12 months?
So look, we have an exciting opportunity with a large electric vehicle aircraft, right? Probably start by wire and it'll move. So we think a lot about the movement of packages. We think a lot about sustainability and ESG. So I'm super excited about this one. We have another company that has a unique robotics technology that allows for humans and robots to actually safely operate without cages, right? We're super excited about that one. So you will find that we're excited about things that might be honestly a bit of a moonshot. That electric aircraft, we recognize it's a moonshot and it may not work. That's one of the reasons we like it the best. I'm probably more bullish about that one, right? So those are the ones that we're looking at. But again, we've seen a lot of them. I am really happy to say that the market has embraced the fact that we have this fund. And I will suggest to people to look me up on LinkedIn, reach out to me. I will get to you, go through someone like Nicolas's team. If you do your checks in the venture ecosystem, people know me. And so I'm not hard to find. I want to be easy to find.
Very nice. Sherwin, thank you for your time today and for all the golden nuggets and sharing the best practices today. It was excellent.
Thanks, Nicolas. Thank you for having me. So excited. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.